What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V, and I believe this is episode 285. Today we got another season preview for you here. We're previewing some, 2A/3A teams here up north in what was the Patriot League a bit ago. So we're going to be talking about Resurrection Christian, Berthoud, the Academy, University, Brush, for Lupton, Severance, Sterling, and we're adding on Elizabeth down south as well to talk about. So a lot of really good programs, fun teams to talk about on this one. Per usual with these season previews, we're going to talk about last year, just talk about how the season went, all that great stuff. Talk about playoffs as well, if they made it or if they didn't. And then we'll talk about some players that, each team is losing. Some graduating seniors here, / possible transfers. Those happen every now and then as well. So we're going to make sure we just get to talk about all the players that each team will be without going into this 2023 season. And then we're going to go ahead and predict the records, go game by game on their schedule and talk about that as well, and try to predict what each team, how many wins each team will win by giving them a window of wins here, aka wow. That way it kind of gives us some leeway there, just in case we're wrong, because there are some games that we look at and we're like, hey, that really could go either way, or it could be a potential trap game, whatever, right? But I'm also gonna give a set predicted record here based on the number of games scheduled. I know some teams haven't completely finished their schedule yet, as in, they have the league games that they're going to play naturally, but they do not have all their out-of-league games ready yet. And it's July 17th, by the way, when I'm recording this. So, it's a little late. At this point, season starts in about a month here. So it is what it is, right? But we're going to do our best with all of that. But, before we get started, I do have some stats because we did predict the records and how well these teams would do last year. And so kind of a little breakdown before we go into our first team here. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk about, how our predictions from last year held up to this year real quick. And so 2 of the 9 teams that we will be talking about on this episode, that I will be talking about on this episode, I predicted the record exactly right. Same amount of wins, losses, predicted that exactly right last year going into their 2022 season. All right. Now, 2 other of the 9 teams here, I predicted, within their window of wins. So, they finished within the window of wins. So, still in the ballpark of my predictions from last year. And then 3 of the teams here were within 1 game of those window of wins. So, if I gave them a window of wins of 5 to 7, maybe they finished with 4 wins. Maybe they finished with 8 wins. So just off the mark, not quite in the neighborhood, but just off the mark. And then there are 2 teams on here that I was just wrong about. Not close at all. And, I own up to that. So there you go. They're pretty well spread out on this one here. The majority, though, I will say 7 of the 9, I was relatively correct about. So I will take that. But with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into our first season preview here. And let's go ahead and talk about Resurrection Christian. Moved up to 3A last year. And, I predicted the record pretty much exactly correct. I only expected them to have 3 losses on the season here. They did add on an extra game, which was the game against Sand Creek. But I definitely would have predicted that as a win. Still predicted their wins correctly, saying they should only have 3 in the regular season. So they are one of the 2 teams on this episode whose record I predicted exactly right there, or as well as I could have there. So I'm going to take that one there. But, let's go ahead and talk about what happened last season here. They played a lot of out-of-state teams. They played Orange Road Christian from Florida. They played Buffalo from Wyoming. They played in Katy, Texas, St. John here. So they played those three. Those three were all wins. 36-0 against that Florida team. 20-14 against the Wyoming team. That one was a little bit closer. And then winning away here, this was a big one, 34-21. That is absolutely huge. Also, in this first 5-game stretch, they would play Moffat County and Sand Creek here, blowing out both. Moffat County being blown out by 30 here, then beating Sand Creek by 56, so that was huge. And then they played Roosevelt. Now, this was a game that I predicted to be a loss here, but it was definitely a little bit closer than I thought it would be, 35-20 if you're Resurrection Christian. I said this at the time when we did the recap that week of the regular season, but I said that's a pretty solid loss to take. You know, it could have definitely been worse, and so you can be happy with that moving forward. So there you go there. But then they would go ahead and beat Severance in a close one, 28-22, Mountain View 28-0, and then they'd play Northridge here. They lost to them 35-6, and then they lost to Thompson Valley, interesting enough, of 41-6. So there you go. I believe, actually, I had them beating Severance, I had them losing to Severance and beating Thompson Valley. They just had that one switched around. So, but still, the same record I predicted them to had, which was 6-3, 7-3 if you count the Sand Creek game, which I will. So there you go. Only lost 3 games on the season, and I'll take that. Now, in the playoffs, they pulled a tough team to start here in the first round, and that was Green Mountain, who they lost to 58-0. But, this team, they are returning a pretty solid amount here. Let's talk about some graduating seniors, starting with Carter Evans. He was their starting quarterback, trying to replace Eddie Lemos from last year. He passed for 793 passing yards, 11 touchdowns to 4 picks, also rushed for 119 yards and 4 touchdowns. It was hard to replace his predecessor, and it was hard for Eddie Lemos to replace his predecessor, but they both found a way to get it done, being both pretty efficient there. But, you do got to keep in mind, Rez has had, 3 quarterbacks in 4 years play. They haven't had a lot of continuity yet, so one has to think if they can get a quarterback in there that could hold it down for more than 1 year. And obviously, he was a senior when he took over, so there wasn't much you could do there. But if they can, that would really help out the program moving forward. So we'll just have to see what happens going into their 4th quarterback in 4 years. On top of that, they're also graduating Maddox Bothwell here. He was one of the few other seniors graduating who tagged on about 18 tacklers, and he was their 1 out of 13 leading tacklers that they are losing. So out of their top 13 leading tacklers, he is the only one that will be graduating. They returned their entire defense, basically. So there you go. Those are really the only seniors, or key seniors, that I could find. And I'm not going to talk about every single player on every season preview. There's just not enough time about that. So I'm going to say that right now as I go into key players here and talk about some of the key players here, starting with running back Hunter Hansen. As a junior, he rushed for 884 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, going into his senior year looking to take another step forward and be one of the engines to this offense. Going to the defensive side of the ball slightly here, we have Will Reeves, the incoming senior. He's now 6'1", 210 pounds. Also plays fullback, by the way, where he had 212 yards and 4 touchdowns on 19 carries. So look for him to, stay in the mix on offense. But on defense, he had 59 tackles and 6 tackles for loss. Not only should he help complete the backfield on offense, but should take another step forward, leading an experienced defense here. So there you go. That's a big-time linebacker to look out for. Definitely a watch list guy. And then in addition, you have Grant Appleby. He was the 2nd leading rusher with 339 yards and 5 touchdowns while catching 18 receptions for 186 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was also the 2nd leading tackler on defense with 51 tackles. And then, I know I already talked about a couple players here, but in general, I think one of the key pieces to this offense is this defense. It will basically be the same as last year, so shout out all of those guys. They should see a lot of improvement after their first year in 3A, and for a lot of them was their first year on varsity as well, or getting, significant varsity snaps. So it's going to be big for them moving forward, with the majority of their offense obviously what's outside of their quarterback, and then you have their entire defense except for one player coming back for the most part. So there you go. Now, as of July 17th, they only have 7 games scheduled here. I could wait a little bit longer, but, there's a lot to do here moving forward as football season does approach. So, you just kind of got to work with what you have here. But they do, interesting enough, have another out-of-state game scheduled here against St. John's. This time it's a different St. John's. They are hosting them. It looks like they're hosting them at home, which is interesting. But they're coming from Florida. Looked at St. John's schedule from last year. They didn't look super good. They didn't have the greatest season. So I kind of feel like Rez could continue their out-of-state dominance here by beating them at home. That's a Thursday game here, September 21st. So there should be a couple more games leading up to that point for sure, though. At least I would think so, right? So we'll just have to see what happens, but I definitely think that should be a win, especially with all the returning. Following that, they play Sand Creek. They hammered them last year. Sand Creek loses some pieces while Rez returns everyone, so this really shouldn't be a different outcome. Then they play Roosevelt, the defending champions. This one will be at home and will be an interesting one for sure here. It's hard to predict as Roosevelt is losing some key pieces while Rez returns a squad that were within 2 scores of them last year. But I think I'm going to give it to Roosevelt right now. They are the defending champs, right? So until you take it away from them, we'll just have to see. And it's not like they're losing that many pieces. They still return Bronco Hartson, Xavier Ramirez, all guys who will be issues moving forward for multiple teams, including Rez. So if they can stop this offense and then, get going on their own on offense, with a new quarterback. I mean, by this point, it'll be October. You kind of think that they would have something together here. So we'll just have to see about that. That will be a close game, though. Then they play Severance. This one's away. This is a game that either myself or Gideon or both of us will be looking to go to in person, because this really should be a good game, and it was a close one last year. I know we're going to talk about Severance later on in this episode here, and they went through some tough injuries, it seemed like, last season. Some tough injuries. So there's that. I'm going to give it to Severance, but it could definitely go their way here if they control the ball and play good defense, limit the turnovers on their own on offense as well. So we'll just have to see about that one. So 2 tough games against Roosevelt and Severance, who I think are playoff teams. I'm predicting them as losses now because I could definitely see them as wins in the playoffs. I'm just going to say that, which might not mean anything, but I'm just going to say that. Then they play Mountain View, Northridge. They definitely both should be wins here. Northridge is losing a lot. That should be different. So there you go. That should definitely be dub. Then they play Thompson Valley. This is a team that's another playoff team. They are returning almost their entire offense and defense, their entire team here. So they're going to be tough to beat. I think this is another game that could go either way. That's going to be a loss. Or I'm going to give it as a loss, to Rez here. Altogether, based on their schedule, I have them going 4-3 here. But I'm going to give them a pretty big window of wins of 4-8 because I really think the Roosevelt Severance and Thompson Valley games could all be flipped and all be wins as well. That would put them at 7, and then they'll probably schedule more games. I assume they'll win one more game here out of the games that they haven't scheduled yet. That would put them at 8. Now, honestly, realistically, do I think they could beat Roosevelt, Severance, and Thompson Valley? Probably not. They could they'll probably go 2-1. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 3-0. I think that's best case scenario, obviously. But, we could say 2-1, so that puts them at 6 wins, and then 2 more non-league wins. I could definitely see that as well. Regardless, I think Resurrection Christian's a playoff team. I think they are a top-tier playoff team, and, man, I just think they're going to be tough to beat. I think this is going to be a team that'll contend for state, potentially. So we'll just have to see what happens. I think they have a good defense. They're going to be more experienced. They have, historically always had a good defense. And so just adjusting to 3A last year, that'll be good for them. And they'll take that experience going into this next season. And then on offense, they have enough running backs where I'm like, okay, you can rely on the run. You can feel good about that. But what is going to happen at quarterback, right? What's going to happen there? How successful is he going to be? How fast can he pick this stuff up? I think that's definitely going to be an important piece to what they do on offense and how successful they are. Because honestly, they're going to need a quarterback to beat teams like Roosevelt, Severance, and Thompson Valley. Someone to at least be efficient, right? So I think that's going to be key. That's why I'm a little hesitant about them winning those games. Because, it definitely would help to have another dimension on offense, right? Or another contributor as well outside of Hanson, Reeves, and Appleby. So, we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. But regardless, I think Rez should be due for a big season. At least a playoff season for sure here. All right, let's move on. Let's go to the 2A level here where we are going to talk about Berthoud. Last year in the regular season they went 6-3, so that fell within my window of wins for them. I originally predicted them going 5-4 with a window of wins between 4 and 6, so there you go. They are one of the teams on this episode that I was at least in the ballpark about when predicting their season. But with that being said, let's talk about what happened in the regular season. To start off, they went ahead and got a dub against Timnath, 48-0 as expected, beat Valley 43-7 here. But then they lost to Thompson Valley 22-6. That was a game that I had them winning, but I am also going to say this. There were 2 players that I thought were going to be key to last season in Darren Davidson, their quarterback, and Jaden Noor, their standout freshman wide receiver, and both of them transferred last season. So there you go. They definitely lost this one 22-6, though, so not as bad, but a tough loss nonetheless. Then they played Lamar here. This was a game that I thought they would lose, but they ended up beating them in a close one, though. 18-14 here. So there you go there. That kind of evened itself out there. Then they played Fort Lupton, Forge Christian, both dubs there before losing to both Eden and the Academy. Eden 34-6, the Academy a little bit closer, 21-7. And then they beat Steamboat Springs in their last regular season game here, 38-21. Which I originally thought might be a loss if we turned into a shootout. But, they ended up winning that shootout this time around. So that's definitely big time there. That's why they finished 1 game over their predicted record. But in the playoffs, they pulled a tough team in Delta, who would end up going to state here. And they lost to them 42-0. So, honestly, not a bad season. Looking at some of the teams they played, Thompson Valley, who made some noise in 3A football. That's a good opponent. They only lost to 22-6. Eden obviously won state. The Academy was another playoff team. Delta would go to state as well. So, some tough squads here, but definitely a lot of learning to be done here. Now, let's talk about some graduating seniors, some guys that were big parts of their success last season, starting with Ben Hughes, the 6', 205-pound running back / linebacker, was the second leading rusher with 484 yards and 3 touchdowns, while adding on 77 tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, and 4 sacks as one of the best athletes on this squad. They also lose Evan, I think it's Sauget, The 6'3", 190-pound athlete, he was the third leading rusher with 258 yards and 3 touchdowns, most of that coming in an elite performance against Steamboat Springs, but he was also their lead receiver with 24 receptions, 299 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Altogether, though, Berthoud on defense only losing 4 of their top 13 tacklers. That does include Hughes and Sauget there. So not losing a whole ton there. And then on offense, those were really the only key guys that they were going to be missing. Now let's talk about some key guys they returned, starting with their star Alex Larson. The incoming senior was the workhorse, running for 1,262 yards and 10 touchdowns. He will be an Offensive Playmaker of the Year candidate this upcoming season, in my opinion, potentially here, and is one of the best in the state at running back. He's a tough one over there. Should look to take another step forward. They also bring back Joey Finnegan here. The incoming senior at outside linebacker had 101 tackles, 17 tackles for loss, and a 2A best, 11 sacks and 10 hurries. He will be a huge part of the defense that will be returning the majority of their firepower here. He is also a watch list guy at edge rusher for us. I mean, he just has really good speed, knows how to maneuver around, set the edge there, and then just pass rushes extremely well. Will be a tough one for a lot of teams to deal with. They also return Ben Larson here. He's a 6 foot, 220 pound incoming senior linebacker who led the team with 126 tackles and 4 tackles for loss and is a tackling machine. In the last 6 games of the season last year, he had at least 15 tackles in each of those games and more, honestly. So there you go there. He will be returning with a top 10 two-way defense here in Berthoud. They also return Aiden McGrath. He's another, this time 6'2", 220-pound linebacker. He had 113 tackles and will be returning with Larson. So there you go there. That's some pretty good size if you're Berthoud there. 2 220-pound linebackers, 6 foot and up, returning. Plus you return Joey Finnegan, who was a really good outside linebacker, edge rusher. I mean, this Berthoud team is going to be tough, centered around this linebacker crew here. Plus you have Alex Larson back there, who's going to be doing his thing at running back. So with that being said, they're returning a solid squad here. Let's predict and talk about this 2023 season here. To start, they play Timnath. I think that's a dub for them. This linebacking core should be able to handle business. Same with Thompson Valley. Same with Valley. And I would say also same with Thompson Valley. Except with the Thompson Valley game, that game might be closer, but I trust Berthoud to stop them on defense here and for their defense to really step up. This may very well be an old school defensive battle, so we will see what happens here. Could go either way, but I'm going to give it to Berthoud this time around. Then they play Lamar. I think last year's game was close, but with the loss of some key players for Lamar, I really feel like Berthoud could win this one and by a good number of points. They play for Lupton after that. That should be a dub. Forge Christian as well. This could be a closer game here, but I like Berthoud's defense more, so I'm going to give that win to them. Then they play Eden here, one of their first league games. This could be a lot closer. I think it will be a lot closer here. We'll see how it goes down. I am definitely still concerned about the lack of a passing game for Berthoud and just options outside of Alex Larson in general. But maybe their sophomore quarterback makes some significant improvements here, and this could be a winnable game. But for now, I'm going to say this is a very close loss. But if they could win this one, this would be key for league, though. So that's all I'm going to say there, and I think it's winnable for sure. After that, they play the Academy. I think that's a win there. Without Isaiah Elliott and some other players, this should definitely be a win for them. Following that, to end the season here, they play Steamboat Springs. I think that's a win. This could be really important for both teams, though. For Berthoud, this will probably affect seeding in the playoffs, while for Steamboat, this may be a potential game that they need to win to make the playoffs. Regardless, I think this Berthoud defense is going to be really, really good here. So I think that's going to win them this game. Altogether, out of the 9 games scheduled so far here as of July 17th, I have them going 8-1 with a window of wins between 7 and 9. Look, this Berthoud defense should be really good this season, while their offense should continue to take steps forward while relying on their star running back Alex Larson. If their now junior quarterback can't take a step forward, I think this is a state championship caliber team, as in winning state. So we're going to have to see. I think 2A is pretty wide open here. And so you throw in an experienced defense, some big linebackers that I really like. You also throw in, a good running back to really lean on here when things get tough. I think this could be a really strong Berthoud squad moving forward. Okay, moving on though, let's talk about the academy. They went 7-2 as I predicted, so they were one of the teams whose record I got exactly right. One of the two on this episode that I got exactly right. So there you go there. But there are some games that were just slightly different. As expected, though, they went ahead. They defeated Timnath. They defeated Elizabeth here. They defeated Devlin, which I thought would be a loss there. They beat them 54-6, which was huge here. But then they played Delta. That was a game that I thought they would win, but they lost 31-14. That was much closer than the score indicated. So there you go. Those two games were flipped. After that, everything else was pretty much the same here. I mean, blew out Forge Christian, beat Steamboat Springs 68-27, by the way. Beat Fort Lupton 50-13. Beat Berthoud in kind of a close one, 21-7. Then lost to Eden at home 25-13. I was at that game. That was another winnable game there, but they also lost a key player to injury kind of late. So that obviously killed all the momentum they had. And then they went to the playoffs. I don't know if they were fully healthy in that one, because it was right after that tough Eden game where they sustained a significant injury. But they lost that one 14-13. That's definitely a tough one to take on the chin there. I mean, just didn't have a great game, and they got upset. So there you go. That's a tough way to go. I mean, but still, they had a very successful season doing their thing. But let's talk about some graduating seniors who really contributed to that, starting with the Offensive Playmaker of the Year finalist from 2022, Isaiah Elliott, their quarterback. He threw for 1,737 yards, 15 touchdowns, only 6 picks, while also rushing for 774 yards and an additional 15 touchdowns as the main engine on this offense. On defense, he also contributed 28 tackles and 3 interceptions at safety. Then we have Corbin Miller here. He was a Defensive Playmaker of the Year finalist. He had 140 tackles, 40 tackles for loss, which is insane, and 5 sacks, absolutely cleaning up for this defense. This production is not something that could be easily placed by 1 or even 2 players. A lot like Isaiah Elliott, I would say. So 2 tough players to be losing right off the bat. But it continues because they also lose Derek Rail here. Or Rayo, I want to say. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong. But he was their lead receiver with 42 receptions on 812 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. He took a really nasty hit at the end of the regular season against Eden, but he's still playing in the playoffs, apparently. I don't know about that one, but he played. So there you go there. He also played corner, holding it down with 62 tackles on defense over there. So when he went out against Eden, that was obviously a tough blow. I don't know if he played the full game against University, and if he did, I really don't know where he was at, because that was a pretty tough hit to take just a week before against Eden. So there you go there. But on top of that, they also lose their starting running back and lead rusher, Jay Donahue, who had 921 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns, along with 17 receptions and 212 receiving yards. Also on defense, he had 57 tackles and 4 tackles for loss. Altogether, that's a lot of damage being done by that walking stage there. I mean, they're graduating 9 of their top 13 tacklers. A lot of contributors there. I mean, 2 of their starting corners, Corbin Miller, who was one of their best linebackers, a safety, and Isaiah Elliott at least. So there you go, plus a couple more. Then on offense, I mean, you're losing your quarterback, running back, and receiver there. So That's your big three. But let's talk about some key players to look out for going into this season, starting with Andres Mendoza here. He was the second leading tackler from his free safety spot. The incoming junior had 72 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 4 picks as a sophomore. He's one of the lone returners on defense, and he's really good as well. I think he's a watch list guy, so he'll be vital to this team that won't be returning a lot on defense. So there you go there. They also returned Sean Smith. The incoming senior is one of the few skill players returning on offense. He was their third leading rusher with 243 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on only 13 carries, also catching 18 receptions for 309 yards and 5 touchdowns. He's a speedster. He's tough, and I expect the academy to kind of, work the offense through him. Whether they put him at running back or receiver, he should be a main focal point as he's extremely talented and a good receiver out there. And then last but not least, one more player I want to talk about is Jace Farmer. He will most likely be the next quarterback up as a junior, and so the offense may rely on him to kind of get it done here, especially when you have a good receiver like Sean Smith. So we're just going to have to see what happens there. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about this upcoming 2023 season here and how it will go potentially. Let me start with a league game against Fort Lupton. It's not scheduled yet, but they are in their league, so I know it will be. But I think that's a dub if they play them. Fort Lupton will be losing a solid amount, just like the Academy. But I trust the Academy to have enough offensive firepower to kind of put them over the top there. Alright, so there you go. Not scheduled yet, but it will be. But their first game, at least on their schedule here, is against Timnath. This should be a closer game, considering Timnath will bring back everybody, and the Academy is almost the opposite. But I just don't think Timnath is quite there to beat them. They're still a little green. So this should probably still go the Academy's way, and that should be a win. But then they play Elizabeth. Elizabeth will be tough. They are returning a playoff team, basically, while the Academy is losing one. I think Elizabeth wins this one against them, so that's a loss. Then they play Devlin. Devlin, just like the Academy, is losing a significant portion of their squad, so this game may actually be extremely close, but I like Sean Smith and his squad a little bit better. This game can definitely go either way, but I trust them to win it. Like I said, I like Sean Smith here. I think this is a game where he could definitely turn up. Then they play Delta. That I don't think they're winning that game there. Following that, they play Forge Christian, rebrand or not. That should definitely still be a dub. I think the Academy will be able to turn up against them, but it will be a close game, though, as they return more than them. So who knows, right? But I have the Academy winning that one as of right now. Following that, they play Steamboat Springs here. I think that's a dub. They should be able to out-muscle them out up front there. They should be bigger than them up front, which is why I'm going to go ahead and give that dub to the Academy. Following that, they play Berthoud and Eden. I think those are both losses. So, there you go. With all that being said, I have them going 5-4 with a window of wins between 2 and 5. Look, I think 500 is the best I think they can finish at. With them losing so many defenders, plus their core on offense, it's hard to imagine what this squad will look like. Sean Smith is definitely one of the best skill players in the state, though, and I think it's fair to say the safest bet would be to run the offense through him until everyone else gets established, confident, up to date, I guess, going forward here, but that can take some time. So there you go. I will say, though, about their schedule that the Steamboat Springs, Forge Christian, and Devlin games are games that I truly feel like could go the other way. As in, they could definitely be losses, which is why I have their window of wins at 2 here, and them finishing at best, with 5 wins. But we'll just have to see. I mean, they play some tough squads. Eden, Berthoud, Delta, Elizabeth. I mean, those are 4 losses right off the bat, in my opinion, right? Those are tough games to win against teams that are playoff teams, in my opinion, and are returning a lot. So yeah, we'll just have to see. It'll be a growing year for them. It's not like they won't have some pieces. I think Sean Smith will be really exciting to watch. Mendoza, their safety, will be really fun to watch, but they're going to need some other guys to step up for them to, continue to move forward and get better. So we'll just have to see about that. Okay, now the next team I'm going to talk about here is University. Last season, predicted them going 5-2. Their schedule was obviously not complete at that point, but I gave them a window of wins of 5-7. I did say they're likely to add on a couple more wins, so we'll see how that turns out. It just kind of depends who they were going to schedule there, but I said they would win at least 5 games. Now, in the regular season in 2022, they finished 6-3, which was within the window of wins I predicted them to be in. So in the ballpark, they're just one more game better here, as I did give them a window of wins to 5-7. So boom, there you go there. Let's talk about how the regular season went. They played Delta to start. That was a loss 24-0. Eden lost 41-6. Those are both teams I didn't think they'd be able to beat, not at this point yet. Then they played Elizabeth. I thought by this point maybe they would get their quarterback situation figured out, as well as some other things. So I originally predicted this one as a win, but they lost to them 14-7. So that's definitely a winnable game. You know, maybe if it was at the end of the season, they win that one and buy a lot more. So there you go. But following that, they play Highland, beat them 48-8. Played Timnath, beat them 58-6. Weld Central as well, 47-6. Arvada was not scheduled yet, but you know, I think I probably would have had them winning that. But they beat them 55-14 regardless. Played Rush. They would beat them 27-14. Beat Sterling 42-8 there. So there you go. I guess I just didn't have some league games for them. But still, though, they did a good job winning some games that I felt like they should win here. Not like the toughest competition, except for maybe Brush. But, you know, that's kind of maybe what they needed here, to just play some teams and kind of stabilize themselves, figure out some things, I'd say primarily on the offensive side of the ball, because I know they tried out a couple of different quarterbacks there. So there you go there. But in the playoffs, you know, it started out well. They beat the Academy 14-13. Just talked about them earlier. They were without one of their players at 100%, and he couldn't have possibly had been at 100%. So there you go there. But you know, they still grinded out a tough one. Beat them 14-13. That's big time. And then they played TCA, where they just got smacked 44-12. I watched a good amount of that game. That game was never close. Really, they just got dominated up front, to be honest with you. So there you go there. But, you know, for a team that was replacing kind of a lot, you know, they were replacing their offense, most of their offense, I would say, with Greg Garza and some other guys, you know, some other receivers there, like Cannon Padilla, Tate Chacon. They also lost their middle linebacker, Jack Virgil. You know, that's kind of a lot to overcome. So for them to get to the second round is definitely still a pretty successful year, you know, because they did figure some things out. But they are graduating some seniors here. Let's talk about it. They're losing Logan Getting. He was slated to be the starting quarterback before moving back to receiver, which, you know, I always thought he should have played receiver. But the 6'4", 210-pound receiver caught for his 17 receptions, 313 yards, and 4 touchdowns, also rushing for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then on defense, he tagged on 22 tackles. They also lose Paxton Daggett. He was an all-around athlete who had, he was their second leading rusher / receiver with 345 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. Also 16 receptions and 253 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. So that's a productive athlete you're losing. Then on defense, they're losing 2 linebackers here who are really important. Keon Baxley, the outside linebacker, he had 66 tackles, 55 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, 2 picks. And then Chase Heck, their middle linebacker, had 54 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 pass deflections, and 2 fumble recoveries. Altogether, though, it's not that bad. They're only losing 4 of their top 13 tacklers, but that does include their top 2 tacklers, though. So, you know, you're probably going to have to replace some leadership there or ask more of some other guys. But altogether, not that bad, as University does return a more experienced squad going into this 2023 year. Now, let's talk about some key players, starting with Cole Crosant here. He would eventually win the starting quarterback job, and he settled in pretty nicely as the year went on. He will be an incoming senior this year, but as a junior, in the time he had, which granted he didn't start right away. He started kind of in the second half here. He threw for 1,108 yards, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks. That does not include the TCA playoff game, though, where he did throw a couple interceptions, but he also rushed for 781 yards and 7 touchdowns. I think he could help carry this offense and help University make a run. And I also think he's definitely an offensive playmaker / MVP candidate going into this 2A season here. We'll just have to see. I think he's definitely a front runner, but, things could change. But I do expect him to do well. I mean, those are very efficient numbers for just the second half. Now, he has a full off season moving forward. He should have a full season, regular season as well. I think he could really turn up here, so things could get exciting. They also returned Jacob Cruz / Revan Doss. These two skill players got some touches last year, but with the skill group losing a significant amount of those players, I could see these two stepping up and being big-time contributors on offense. Wanted to shout those two out there real quick there. So there you go. And then lastly, I mean, they are returning the majority of their defense, so wanted to shout them out, but also wanted to shout out our guy, Carson Rash, 6'4", 190 pounds, will be switching to defensive end here, so he has some pretty good size for that here for his junior year. I think he could be a big contributor, for this defense this next year, and that could be a big difference for this University squad here. We'll just have to see how he turns out. But regardless, this defense should be returning a pretty experienced squad in general there. So there you go. But let's talk about this 2023 season here. Obviously, there's a lot of great players to talk about, but I mean, just don't have the time to talk about everybody. So let's get to it. This is as of July 17th. By the way, here they have 2 non-league games scheduled and then 3 league games. I'm just going to assume, that they play the same league here. So there you go. So I'm going to add on 2 more league games. Those 2 league games that they haven't scheduled yet, but they will play, is against Wild Central, who I think they'll definitely beat, and against Brush, who I think they'll beat probably by a lot more this year, honestly, as they are losing quite a bit. We're going to talk about Brush right after this team, though, so tune in for that. But they should definitely beat both of those teams. I don't know why they would ever lose to both, or either, right? So there you go. But let's talk about some of the games they actually have scheduled, starting with Delta. I think they open against them. I think that'll be a loss. This will be a tough win to get for them. They are one of the best in the state. I would say they're probably the front runner to go to state and win it again. They return Ty Reed. They return Tucker Johnson, who's a monster off the edge. I do kind of worry about how they're going to handle Tucker Johnson off the edge, but we'll just have to see about that. But altogether, I think it will probably come down to a little shootout between Ty Reed and Cole Crosett here. Could definitely be a win, but I'm going to call it a loss just to be safe for now. Then they play Eden away at Eden. This could be a winnable game, but, Eden, despite losing some players, they do have a history of just pounding the football. And despite not having some of the same pieces from last year, unless University can match their physicality up front for all 4 quarters, because that's what you need to do that for all 4 quarters, I'll give Eden the very slight edge. Extremely slight. But like the Delta game, and I think maybe even a little bit more, this is a game they could win. I would still say 50-50, though, as, Eden, they will definitely be running the ball a lot more. Losing a guy like Walker Martin, who, by the way, just got drafted by the San Francisco Giants. So there you go there. But they're definitely going to be running the ball more. That's going to be their identity. They return a good line. And then University, I mean, you're still going to probably be figuring some things out with your receivers, running back too as well probably, right? So we'll just have to see. That's kind of a tough game to play here second. If it was a little bit later, I would for sure probably call that a win for them. So there you go. But after that, they play league, or at least that's what's on their schedule right now. They'll probably schedule maybe 2 more non-league games potentially here. 1 or 2 more, maybe 2 or 3 more non-league games here. But they play their league, and it's not difficult really at all. They play Timnath, Arvada, Sterling, as well as Central and Brush, which I already talked about. they should be able to sweep. I mean, those should all be wins, and those should not be close in any way. They should probably be won by 3 or more scores, honestly. So there you go. And that's not disrespect, that's just reality, right? So there you go. Altogether, my record for predicted record as of right now for University is 5-2 here, but I'm giving them a window of wins of 5-9. This is probably the biggest window of wins I'm giving them, because I also think there is a world where they beat both Delta and Eden and Sweep League, so that's at least 7 games there. Plus, they're probably going to schedule a couple more games, so I really feel like they could win probably 2 more non-league games, because I really don't think there are a lot of teams. Yeah, I don't think there are a lot of teams in 2A that could beat them. So there you go there. This is going to be a tough team led by Cole Crosant. I anticipate them being a top seed in the playoffs. They really shouldn't lose a league game, so that should help there. And then they should play both Delta and Eden close, if not beating both, honestly. So there's that too. I like their defense. I think they could figure it out. They're returning the majority of tacklers from last year, only lost 4 of their 13. They return a quarterback who was really efficient in the time he was given. I think he is somebody. I don't want to make this prediction. I don't think he's going to break Greg Garza's records, but I think he could get close, is all I'm going to say there. So there you go there. That is University. Should be due for a big season here. I would call them contenders as well, by the way. So, yeah, I think they're contenders. They could definitely go to state. And if they go there, I think they could win it too. So, yeah. But, yeah, that's University. Should be due for a big season. Okay, moving on, let's talk about Brush. We've talked about them a little bit in some other season previews here of other teams, but let's finally talk about them here. So, they won 5-4, finishing within 1 game of my window of wins here. So just outside the neighborhood, still, relatively in the ballpark, I guess, or just outside the ballpark, you could say, but still in the neighborhood here. But pretty close about them. They won 5-4, right? And so, with that being said, let's kind of just talk about how this season went here. They lost to Wiggins to start 27-7. It wasn't close. That was a game that I predicted as a win, and they just got outscored, and then they couldn't really recover from that. This is kind of a team that needs to maintain a lead here, so there you go, especially when they're losing, the amount of players that they did. So, lost to Wiggins. That was one I was wrong about. And then following that, they would beat Fort Morgan 26-14. Then they would lose to Yuma 10-7 in a close game. So that could have potentially been a win there. And then they played Rifle, and they actually lost to them 28-23. I predicted that as a win. That could have won either way. And they just ended up losing to them 28-23, so that's definitely tough there. But then they would win their other games, which I guess the rest of their games would go as I predicted here. They wouldn't win all of them, as they would lose to University 27-14. I mean, I always thought that was probably going to be a loss there, or I'm pretty sure I said that would definitely be a loss there. So there you go. But they would beat Arvada 48-20, Sterling 61-3, Weld Central 44-0, and then Denver West. That was a non-league game that they kind of just played at the end of the season, but they beat them 42-6. So there you go there. Not a bad season, 5-4. Just missed out on the playoffs here. One does have to think, if they beat Yuma, if they beat Rifle, they're probably in. Or if they beat Rifle, they're definitely in, because Rifle made the playoffs. So there you go there. So that's kind of just a tough pill to swallow there. But let's talk about some graduating seniors. They lose a big one in Ty Griffith. He took over as expected and ran for 1,139 yards and 19 touchdowns as the workhorse for the team. He was also their lead tackler with 82. This is one of the players from that championship squad, one of the last players from that championship squad from a couple years ago that will be missed. So there you go. Another one of those guys is Kale Stegner. He was the lead receiver with 12 receptions for 197 yards and a touchdown. The 6'3", 190-pound player also played on defense, where he had 90 tackles. 40 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, and was the sack leader with 6. They also lose Dominic Ontiveros, the guard slash nose tackle, had 56 tackles and 8 tackles for loss. He also had some carries and was the 3rd leading rusher, which is really interesting there, because I'm pretty sure he also played on the line. But altogether, Brush, they lose 5 of their top 13 tacklers, but that does include 3 of their top 5 leading tacklers, so definitely some leadership that you got to replace up front there. And they also lose some significant parts of their front 7 on defense, along with some size on their offensive line. So definitely going to have to, replace some players in the trenches here, which is key to their team. So there you go. But let's talk about some key players here, starting with Tanner Ludgate, the incoming senior. He was the 2nd leading rusher with 537 yards and 2 touchdowns as a junior. He also had some key performances against Wiggins, going for 98 yards, Sterling going for 103, Fort Morgan here, who they beat, he went for 78. He should be the workhorse as they continue to run the ball. They're really run heavy there, and so I think that's someone that kind of just naturally slides into the Ty Griffith spot. Now, is he going to be as good as him? We'll just have to see, right? We'll just have to see. I think he does return some significant continuity there, which is important. So there you go. And then another player I want to talk about is Cole Curtis. He's another incoming senior. He was the highest leading tackler that will be returning here. So not their lead tackler, but, the highest leading tackler returning. He had 70 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks at defensive tackle. He should lead this defense that will be returning a pretty good amount here. So there you go there. Look for him to take on more of a leadership role. They also return Hunter Proctor. He is an incoming senior as well, who started at corner last year and had 30 tackles and led the team with 3 interceptions. Should be another key part of this defense. So look at those two guys to really, take on a role on defense, and then look at Ludgate to take on that role on offense there. But, let's go ahead and talk about the schedule here for 2023 and whatnot. To start out, they play Rifle. This was a close game last year, and it should probably be this year, I think. But they are playing away at Rifle. So there you go. And Rifle is returning the quarterback and receiver. Had a really good performance against them last year. I think this is a loss. It could go either way. I'm going to call it a loss right now since it is away and they are returning a little bit more here. Then they play Arvada. That should definitely be a dub there. Can be a closer game, I guess, but I still trust them to control the pace of this one and play good defense. Same with Sterling. Not even. I don't think that one's going to be close. I think they just beat them there. Same with Weld Central. Then they also play Timnath. It could potentially go either way, as Timnath will be better as they return everyone, but I think Brush will be tough to beat because they do play them late in the season, October 27th. So there you go there. I think that is definitely a dub there. And then this game is not scheduled yet, but they will play University. As talked about earlier, I think that will be a loss. University returns a really good quarterback who I think will command a great offense there. Plus, they return a good defense too that I think could stop this running game. So altogether, as of July 17th, their schedule, they only have about six-ish games here, so they will add more. But I think they have a window of wins between 4 and 2. Their predicted record is 4 and 2, and then their window of wins is 3 and 6 here. So predicted record 4 and 2, window of wins 3 and 6. Their schedule is incomplete, so it's a little hard to project here. But this is a Brush team that is very well coached on defense and should play solid offense, controlling the pace of the game there. So they're going to be tough for sure. And they will probably go through some growing pains here, but I can still see them making the playoffs here. Not too far over 500. I think 6 wins is really their ceiling there. If they get to 7, then that means multiple other players really stepped up for them, which is definitely possible, right? But for now, just going off of what I know, I think they could finish anywhere between 3 wins to 6 wins, still closer to 500, being one of those teams that'll be a solid squad. So there you go. Okay, let's talk about Fort Lupton next here. So they exceeded expectations. I originally had them going 1-8, but I gave them a window of wins of 0 to 4. I said if the offense is playing at a high level, then I could see them getting close to 500. Well, they finished just over 500 at 5-4, so that is one game over the window of wins. So not in the ballpark, but definitely still in the neighborhood. I'll take that. They were one of the teams out of the 9 here that were that close here. So there you go there. But let's talk about how this season went, this 2022 season went for them. So started out with a close loss to Wheat Ridge, 21-20. I did say that they would lose to them, but this may potentially be close. So I was definitely right in that aspect, but they lost that one regardless. Then they beat Lamar 28-25. I originally thought that would be a loss, but obviously, it was a close win, 28-25. They'll still take that, though I did say this could be close, but it would just depend on how much Fort Lupton could score, and obviously they did more than them. Then Wood Central was a dub. I predicted that correctly. Valley, I thought Valley was going to be a lot better, and they weren't, so they beat them 26-0. Then they lost to Berthoud Eden, the academy, as I thought. Beat Steamboat Springs 52-35 in a little bit of a shootout. I did say it could be closer there and could go either way, so there you go. And then they also beat Forge Christian 34-21 here, and I thought that could potentially have been a loss. So, wrong in some aspects, but this offense, like I said, was clicking as I said that they could. I wasn't sure if they could, but I knew that they had talent over there, and so they figured it out, this season here for them to go over 500, just barely missing out on playoffs, though. But they do lose some significant players here. Let's talk about their graduating seniors, starting with William Alvarado. He was significantly better in his senior year, throwing for 1,664 yards, 15 touchdowns to 15 picks, though. But he also ran for 401 yards and 10 touchdowns. And also, to be fair, 10 of his interceptions did come in 2 games against Eden in the academy, which is wild. But other than that, his productions will be missed because he was a great athlete for Lupton. So that's not exactly an easy thing to replace there. He was the the guy who kind of initialized the offense over there and all that great stuff. So that does kind of put Fort Lupton in a tough spot despite having skilled players all around. They are also losing, though, Caden Durbigny, the lineman. He had 48 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, and was second in sacks here with 3. He was a big part of this defense, so that's some tough size that you're losing up front. They're also losing linebacker Joshua Helvig. The linebacker had 45 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks. And then they are also losing Joseph Gallegos here. This linebacker had 36 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 4 interceptions. He was actually the interception leader for Fort Lupton here. Altogether, they're losing 7 of their top 13 tacklers, so it's not as bad as it could be, but you are losing some guys, like I said, in Durbigny, Helvig, and Gallegos, who were big in their front 7. And then obviously you're losing your quarterback, who accounted for a lot of your scores and production here. So there you go. Let's talk about the key players, the players that are returning, that should contribute to this 2023 season, starting with Caden Taylor. The incoming senior was the lead tackler at linebacker with 86 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. Also had 2 interceptions, 6 pass deflections. He will be a key part of this defense that will be losing the majority of their contributors from last year. So look for him to potentially even have a bigger year with so many guys missing here. Also, there's Royce Guerrero here at corner. He was super productive, collecting 74 tackles and 8.5 tackles for loss. Like Taylor, he's another key part of that defense. Then going over to the offensive side of the ball, you have Dimitri Alarcon, I want to say, the incoming senior. He was the leading rusher with only 439 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. He will probably be leaned on pretty heavily with the loss of their quarterback. And so that's where they might run into some problems, because I don't think they have the biggest line up front there. So that's definitely going to be something to look out for. But if they are successful running the ball, it starts with Alarcon here. Excuse me if I'm saying his name wrong here. And then This is another incoming senior. I think he's their best athlete on the team, and that is Anthony Bland Mendenhall here. He had a breakout season last season where he caught 35 receptions for 656 yards and 8 touchdowns, so also having 28 tackles and 4 interceptions as the co-interception leader, actually. And so, once again, he should help contribute to this squad once more. I mean, he has good speed and whatnot. Now, it's going to be hard for him to produce without a competent quarterback throwing to him. So we'll kind of just have to see what happens here. Like I said, Alvarado did a lot for them. He was also a dual threat. He could run the ball too, as well as throw. So he provided, an extra rushing role there, as well as a solid passer. So it's going to be interesting to see how this offense operates without him, because I do think that will be a pretty significant loss for them here. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this 2023 season here. We'll go game by game, starting with the Wheat Ridge game. Last year was a much closer game, but both teams will be losing their quarterbacks. So I think it could definitely be a similar matchup here. I still think Fort Lupton, though, has enough to win this game with the skill players they return on offense, along with some defensive leaders they return on defense. But don't get it twisted, this is definitely going to be a closer game here. We'll just have to see who can make it by without their starting quarterback better. So there you go there. But then they play Lamar here at home, but Lamar does return their quarterback along with some other pieces. And I just think there's a little bit more continuity there for Lamar than for Lupton. This will be a tough game that could go either way, but I'm going to give it to Lamar since they have the more experienced quarterback. Following that, they play Weld Central. That should definitely be a dub. Valley, I think that should be another win for Fort Lupton, as Valley has kind of struggled against them in the past here, so there you go. But then they play Berthoud and Eden. I think both of those are definitely losses there, along with Steamboat Springs. I think that's another loss. That Steamboat Springs game could be another shootout, but if it is, I think Fort Lupton loses this one, because you got to remember, in last year's Steamboat Springs matchup, Jesse Hamrich, their starting quarterback, did not play in that game. And I think if he comes back and he does play in that game this year, he could put up some numbers. And this defense could definitely struggle here. It was a shootout last year, so I think it can be one this year. But I think that's one they lose, though. Then they play Forge Christian. I think that's a loss. Without Alvarado, if this game becomes closer, then I kind of just trust Forge Christian to battle this one out and win it. So that's another loss there. That's a team that's returning a lot more players too, so that'll be tough. And then they also play the Academy. It's not scheduled yet, but it is a league game. I think that's probably a loss as well. The Academy will be losing similar players in similar positions, like their quarterback, right, and like some defensive guys. But I kind of like the skill players for the Academy a little bit more. I think they have a little bit more firepower. I think Sean Smith could definitely turn up in this game, in a game where, he might be unchallenged, or his challenger might be a more inexperienced player, and that definitely makes me a little bit more nervous. Will be a closer game, though. I don't think it will be a blowout either way, but it will be a close one. So there you go. So altogether, with the games I have here so far as of July 17th, I have them going 3-6 with the window of wins between 2 and 5. Look, this is a team that will be replacing some key players like their starting quarterback, who really helped bring together this offense and produce for them. It took them a minute to get going here. Alvarado was a 3-year starter, so that's not exactly something you replace right away, and he has been one of the best quarterbacks they've had in recent years too. So that's going to be tough. Plus, Fort Lupton, naturally, I think is just smaller up front than a lot of other teams. And so there's going to be a size difference, especially when you play teams like Berthoud, Eden, Lamar. Those are tough teams to play, right? Who I think have some size and across the board, and can be a pretty big issue there. And then when it comes to some of these other teams that are better matched up against, I just don't know about the firepower, because it's one thing to have good skill players, right? But you need someone to be a distributor, right? You need someone to initiate all of that. And so I think that is going to be the biggest question going into this season. What is this offense going to look like here without William Alvarado? So there you go. There, I think the defense will probably be fine as well, or fine-ish, as good as they can be. But it's really going to depend on the offense, in my honest opinion. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and talk about Severance here. Last season was their first season in 3A football. And, I had them going 6-4 still, with a window of wins between 6 and 8. Unfortunately, they went 3-7. This was a season where they definitely had a number of injuries as well. And so there's definitely going to be a lot of what ifs. Like, what if, these certain amount of players were healthy for the entire season? Because I'm just looking at, like, the stats that they have, and they've always been pretty good about keeping their stats. And there are definitely some players missing in between games. And I know they just didn't do stats for those games because I see other players with stats from those games. So it's a tough season. This has always been a talented squad, right? And I thought it was going to be a little bit more seamless, but there's going to be growing pains when you start losing starters and whatnot, and then you got to figure out what you have after that. No team can do that great, right? Unless, they're just super deep like that. But in 3A, I don't think it's going to be like that, especially with a team like Severance, which, only played their 4th ever season last season. So there you go. But this was a team I was wrong about, so I will own up to that. But let's kind of just go through the season here and how it went, starting with Canyon City. They won that one 21-5 as expected. Then they got blown up by Green Mountain, and I thought that was a game where their defense could play a little bit better and stop that rushing attack, but they didn't. Also, this Green Mountain line was a lot better than I thought they would be, a lot more dominant than I thought they would be. So there you go there. So they lost that one 42-0, but then they beat Meade 37-27 there. That was a big one. That was one that I said would be a win since they would be losing so much. So that's obviously a good one to get back over 500. But then they lost to Eden 35-0. I thought this would definitely still be closer, but it was a 35-0 loss at home too. So I don't know. I still said this would have been a loss, but that's still a tough one to take. Then they lost to Evergreen 41-8. They played a pretty tough schedule here. Evergreen is a really good squad there. They lost to Thompson Valley 29-12, which I thought probably should have been a win, but I felt like this was a game where they kind of struggled with injuries. Then they played Resurrection Christian, another team moving up to 3A here with them. I thought that would be a win. They barely lost that one 28-22, so can't be too mad at that. Then they played Roosevelt. I always thought they were going to lose this one, which they did, 55-8. Following that, they played Mountain View, who they kind of barely beat 19-6, which is interesting. But it is what it is. And then in their last game of the season, they played Northridge here. I thought this would still be a loss here, but potentially a close game, and it was. They only lost 27-19 here. So, not too bad. Obviously, if you win some of these closer games here, the Northridge game, obviously, the Res game, those two for sure. Then, if they get to 500 winning those two games, they probably make the playoffs. But they didn't. And so, with that being said, let's talk about some graduating seniors, as this is the first senior class that I'm pretty sure they've had all 4 years here. So, starting with Dominic Butts here, the 6'5", 235-pound defensive end is now committed to UNC. So, there you go there. Also, I believe he was an all-Playmaker guy for us last year. But he capped off a pretty successful year at Severance. He was the lead tackler with 91 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, and 9 sacks as the sack leader. And I also want to say he was a starting offensive tackle as well. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was. They're also losing Parker Gazdick here. He was the starting corner. He had a starting corner. He had 49 tackles and was the leader in interceptions with 5. He's another mainstay that's been playing for a bit. He will be missed. They also lose Ty Adams here. He was a 6'8 receiver who had 352 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. Also had 20 tackles, 3 sacks. He is somebody that was more of a recent emergence for them this last season, but he will obviously be missed. And then they lose Colby Runner. This was a key loss for him because he did not play a lot, last season, I think he had some injuries. And so I'm not going to read off his stats, but I mean, he has been one of their best tacklers at linebacker and was a leader for the squad. That is definitely a tough miss, no doubt about that. So there you go. They had to play without him for the majority of last season too. So there you go. But altogether, they're losing 8 of their top 13 tacklers. Most of the guys they are missing here will be guys on defense, and Severance, I feel like, has always had a solid defense. I mean, except for last year where they did have some injuries there. And so that's going to be a tough replace. 8 of their 13, that's definitely going to be tough. But they still return some good players here. All right, so let's talk about the key players, starting with the Hoffman boys. I'm going to start with the older one, Jaden Hoffman, the 6'2 incoming senior quarterback. He struggled at times last year as the full-time starter. You know, he threw 955 yards, 8 touchdowns to 13 picks, also rushed for 68 yards and 5 touchdowns. But it did appear that there may have been a couple weeks where he was pulled from the game or he was injured. So, you know, who knows there. But those are all games that they also lost. So that's kind of tough. But, you know, going into this senior year, and after watching him a lot in this offseason, I feel like I saw him throw a whole bunch this offseason, or at least a solid amount between the offseason and like the end of last season. But I think he can really be one of the best quarterbacks in the state in 3A. If he could stay healthy, then I trust him to at least lead this team to playoffs, and I think he'll be a key part of this team. He's somebody who I think is a great athlete, could run, throws really well from the pocket as well. He's kind of a sleeper here. He's kind of a sleeper for all Playmaker, you know, all-point MVP potentially. Just kind of depends how this season goes. I think going into his senior year, this will be a big one for recruiting because he does look really good, I would say, without pads. But, you know, you got to put on the pads and perform as well. So we'll just have to see about that. One thing I am going to put out there as well, would love to see him protect himself a little bit better. There are some really tough hits I saw him take. Not in the pocket because, like, you can't control that. But, you know, when he's rushing, it doesn't hurt to slide or run out of bounds. Another yard after you get the first down won't matter that much there. And so we'll definitely love to see a little bit more of that. That's just one thing I noted. And I don't say that a lot, honestly. But I do feel like I have to say it here. So there you go. Now, his brother, Jeremiah Hoffman, might be the best receiver in Colorado, honestly. I think he's the best receiver in 3A, though. But as a sophomore, you know, he's going to be an incoming junior. But as a sophomore, he brought in 35 receptions for 480 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like I said, I think he's the best wideout in 3A and maybe the best in Colorado, honestly. I mean, has multiple interests from Power 5 schools. I won't, you know, disclose that at this moment, but definitely has some interest there, hearing a lot about that, and I think he's poised for a big breakout season. I mean, he's just a freak athlete, really hard to guard, great athleticism, could jump out the gym as well, physical too, good blocker. He's going to attract a lot of attention there, right? And even then, I think he's still going to turn up because you can't just ignore some of the other guys on the Severance team too. So there you go. But continuing on here, though, they also returned Brady Varney, the 6'5", 225-pound incoming senior. Unfortunately, only played 3 games last season. This was another guy they lost. But he plays defensive end and tight end for Severance and was extremely productive his sophomore year. I remember that and loved how he played. I think this could be another big breakout season for him, just like Jeremiah Hoffman, just like Jaden Hoffman. Honestly, I mean, he's very talented. I think he will probably be used a lot more on defense, but, you know, don't be surprised if he's a safety valve on offense as well at tight end. He's one of the bigger, I think he is the biggest tight end in all of 3A at 6'5", 225. Grady Forsyth might be close, but he's definitely up there, so that should be someone to look out for. Then there's Gage Bachman. I have seen him. I don't know. I assume he's going to play for Severance this upcoming year here. I have seen some rumors and stuff, but I'm just going to assume he plays for them. The incoming senior, 5'11", 185-pound athlete, was the lead rusher, actually, with 458 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also caught 102 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns on only 7 receptions. And then on defense, he also had 87 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, and 6 sacks, and he only did this in 7 games. So if he could stay healthy, this squad could definitely be dangerous. That's just the offense there. Now, before I go more into the defensive side, I do want to shout out some other players on offense here, starting with Logan. And excuse me if I'm saying this wrong, but Villainous, I want to say, the 6 foot, 280 pound junior guard. He should definitely be a key part of this offensive line as well. He brings some good size there. They also bring back Quinn Anderson. He's a 6'1", 260 pound senior guard. And David Anderson, I don't know if they're related here, but he is 6'8", 300 pounds at tackle. So they have a pretty sizable offensive line. You know, they have a pretty sizable offensive line. They should be able to run the ball, throw the ball pretty well there, and at least be able to physically dominate some teams there. Or at least on paper, right? So there you go. And then one last player I want to mention, he's on the defensive side of the ball, but Mason Campbell. He's an incoming junior here, and he's a special inside linebacker at 6'3", 200 pounds. Last year, as a sophomore, only played 6 games, but he had 62 tackles in those 6 games. Once again, if he's healthy, I think this team is definitely dangerous. So health is definitely up there. I mean, I don't always say this. I kind of just make my predictions assuming everyone's always healthy. But this team did get, it looks like, got hit by the injury bug just a little bit here. So obviously you want to have that continuity moving forward. And I think that would go a long way, especially in some of these close losses and close wins as well. But let's talk about this 2023 season here. I think it should still be a big one for Severance here. So starting with Canyon City, I think they should really blow them out. That's no disrespect. I just think they should really blow them out. So there you go. Then they play Green Mountain. I think this is a loss. They need to match their aggressiveness on defense, as in the defense needs to be ready to hit all 4 quarters. They're going to run the ball. They're not going to throw it. So got to key in on the run. You got to get a good push on the line. And then the linebackers, they got to get penetration, right? And then you need your DBs to come up and hit. That's not even really a question. You have to do it. It's all hands on deck when it comes to stopping this running game, because Green Mountain also returns a pretty good line here. So if Severance can get a early lead here and force Green Mountain to potentially pass it, if they could go up by 2 scores at any point, I think that's a winnable game. But for now, I'm going to give this to Green Mountain. They always play good defense, and then they control the pace, and they have a very dominant offensive line. So that's going to be a tough one to win. But I'm going to say that's a loss. Then they play Meade. I think that's a dub here. Meade will be losing a solid amount here, and I really think 7 should be able to have a repeat performance against them. But it is away at Meade, so I would not underestimate that. I definitely wouldn't. So there you go. Then they play Eden. I think this is a dub. Eden has been able to hold them off for years, but I honestly think Severance can beat them this year if they could get ahead and force an inexperienced quarterback to try to get Eden back into that game if they do get the lead there. I think that would be key. And honestly, it's about time. This could definitely easily go either way. Maybe they just pound the ball, Eden does, and they don't give Severance many possessions. But if you're Severance, you need to score when you get the ball. And then defensively, you can't let them push you around. You can't let an inexperienced group push you around, is what I'm trying to say there. So, boom, there you go. Evergreen, I think that should be a dub. They are losing everyone. I think they are returning 1 player or 2 on varsity. That's both offense, defense, and special teams. So, I don't know. If you don't win this one, I don't know what to tell you. Thompson Valley, I think that's a loss. That won't be an easy game. This was a game where they weren't completely healthy last year, but I believe this is definitely still winnable. Thompson Valley will be extremely tough to beat, though, as they boast a good, experienced defense, and they have a solid offense. They're going to play them close for sure here. Thompson Valley will be one of the better teams in 3A, I think. So, got to look out for that, but I'm going to, tentatively call that a loss here. Then they play Resurrection Christian. I think that's a win. They should be able to win again this year. Definitely will be a close battle here. So there you go. Then they play Roosevelt. It's a loss. I think it's a loss. I'm having a hard time with it. I think it's a loss. It's definitely winnable, though. They play it at home. Like I said, this is a game that either Gideon or myself or both are going to try to go to because I think this is a good game. I think they could win this game, though, honestly. I really do. But it's going to come down to the quarterbacks. I think it will probably come down to the offenses here, whether the Severance offense could outshoot Roosevelt's, because Roosevelt, I mean, they return Xavier Ramirez, who I think is not only one of the best running back in 3A, but probably one of the best running backs in Colorado, period. Also return Bronco Hartson, their starting quarterback from last year, who made some really big plays in that state championship game to give them their first state championship. So it'll be interesting for sure, you know. But I think I'm going to give it to Roosevelt since they are the defending champs. So that's tough, you know, but, you know, it is what it is. Then they play Mountain View and Northridge. I think those are both dubs, and they probably shouldn't be that close. But honestly, as long as you win, that'll be key. And so altogether, I have Severance going 7-3 with a window of wins between 5 and 8 here. I think, first off, the biggest thing for them is just how healthy they can stay this year. And if they can stay healthy and be at full strength, they shouldn't suffer the disappointment that they did from last season. I honestly believe they are a playoff team for sure here. They play some really tough squads. So honestly, if you get to 500, I think you make the playoffs for sure here. If you get to 500. Anything below, you know, it becomes a little bit more of a toss-up, though. So just keep that in mind. But ideally, I think they can get over 500 and can be a dark horse contender, you know. I really like Jaden Hoffman's game. I like Jeremiah Hoffman's game, too, obviously, for sure. I think that goes without saying. But I really like Jaden Hoffman's game. I think he's a quarterback that could really take over a game if given the time. I mean, give him another year. Right? Last year was his first year as the full-time starter. I think one more year, his senior year, could be a big one. I'm not going to make any predictions number-wise, but I think he could definitely be a big one. And then this defense, I feel like if they have everyone, they're good. So we're just going to see what happens. I know when it came to graduating seniors, they were losing 8 of their top 13 lead tacklers, but there were also players that were hurt, like a Brady Varney, like a Mason Campbell, Gage Bachman at times, right? So those are guys that you return. So really, I feel like they are returning more of their defense than the numbers let on. We'll just have to see. Honestly, at the end of the day, they play a lot of teams that love to run the ball and play physical football. You got to match that and more. You know, it's your second year in 3A. That's just what it is. So we'll just have to see how they respond moving forward. Okay, let's talk about Sterling. They were the other team I was wrong about. I had them going 5-4 with a window of wins between 3 and 5, but instead they went 3-7. 1 game short, of my window of wins, so I wasn't completely wrong there. I was 1 game off with the window of wins, but it was definitely disappointing here. I mean, they begin by losing their first 3 games that I predicted as wins. So they lost to Yuma 56-14, lost to Bennett 68-21, lost to Wellington, a first-year program, 34-20 here. And then winning against Kent Denver 28-26, which is wild because I predicted that as a loss. And then they would go on and get hammered by Weld Central 47-7, which I predicted as a win. And so there you go there. And then, lost to Brush 61-3, beat Timnath finally, which I thought they could win 53-19. Then lost to Arvada 53-21, University 42-8. It's not looking good for Sterling as a program, I think. They might need to go in a different direction is what I need to say here, honestly. They might need to, but we'll just have to see, right? It's not going to be easy getting out of this position here, but that's where they're at. So there you go. Let's talk about some graduating seniors, though, because they are losing some key pieces, starting with their quarterback, Wyatt Buckley, the first-year starter. He did okay, throwing for 1,006 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 10 picks. Also rushed, though, for 543 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also had 43 tackles at linebacker, so a good all-around athlete there. They're also losing Nathaniel Whited here. He rushed for 566 yards and 8 touchdowns as the lead rusher, which I anticipated him to be doing, but he really struggled to get going, and I think a lot of that was because of the blocking up front, so that's just tough. And then altogether on defense, they're only losing 5 of their top 13 tacklers. But, this wasn't the greatest defense, so we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. As far as key players go, Aiden, going into this season, that is, Aiden Gandy, the incoming junior, he had 62 tackles and was a solid contributor on defense. He'll be back for at least 2 more seasons here. Then you have Caden Mykowski here. The incoming junior was actually the lead receiver with 428 yards, 3 touchdowns on 28 receptions, so tagged on 47 tackles, turning up for this team as another great athlete there. And then they also bring back Gage Parker, incoming senior. He was the second lead receiver with 333 yards, 3 touchdowns on 21 receptions, also had 50 tackles. So you're returning some guys here, some receivers, but you need a quarterback to really make the most out of that. They are returning the majority of their defense, so maybe something can get turned around here. But we'll just have to see about that. I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of hard to predict where they're going to be at, honestly. But let's just get to their schedule here. I mean, they play Yuma, Bennett, Wellington. I think those are all losses again. They play Kent Denver this time. It's away. I don't think that is going to be a win. I think that's going to be a loss. Kent Denver, they bring back some really good talent here, which I'm definitely excited about. We'll talk about Kent Denver on a separate season preview, on a separate episode for sure. But that's a tough game to win, I think. They play Weld Central. I think that's a loss. Marcelo Rossi, who hammered this squad for 150-plus yards and 4 touchdowns, was only a sophomore when he did it. So you have at least 2 more years of that left, including this year. Then they play Brush. They're losing a lot, but that's another team that has great physicality up front and played great on defense and whatnot. I don't think they won that one. They play Timnath. It looked like Vince Hawkhalter didn't play in this game last year, and if they did, I feel like they win it. So I think if he does, that's definitely a loss for Sterling. Then Arvada and University are also losses. So altogether, I actually have Sterling going 0-9 with a window of wins between 0 and 3. They just haven't been the same program in a really long time. Their defense will be relatively experienced, so I will give them that. That might win them a couple more games, but without a good offense, that's going to be tough to win some games here. Now, some games I do think they could potentially win. Maybe Kent Denver. Maybe. We'll just have to see about that. Timnath is another one. Potentially. I don't know. And then I feel like you should be able to beat either Weld Central or Arvada, but they lost badly to them last year, so I just don't know about that. I don't think they'll beat Weld Central, so maybe Arvada, but that's where their window of 3 wins at their ceiling is coming from. But right now, I just think they're at 0 to 3 window of wins here. 0 being their floor, obviously, and then 3 being their ceiling. They need players to step up more than they have before in the last couple of seasons, and they just really haven't had that, honestly. But, young defense, young team coming up. We'll see if they could turn it around. I would definitely love to be proved wrong for sure, because I definitely remember when Sterling was really good. So we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. Okay, let's talk about Elizabeth next. This was a team I predicted going 5-4 with the window of wins of 4-6 last season. They exceeded expectations and went 8-1 in the regular season, which honestly I absolutely love here. Look, I got a lot of these games wrong, so we're just going to go game by game here. Against Devlin, they beat them 38-24. I thought that might be a loss here. Was kind of concerned about the size up front and their defense, but they obviously did well enough and shut down a really good Devlin offense, or, limited them. Then they beat Burlington 15-13, which I thought they would. Lost to the Academy. 28-7, which is fine. Beat University 14-7. I thought that might be a game they would lose there. Maybe they didn't have enough firepower, but University was also going through their own stuff at quarterback, so there you go there. Then they beat Englewood here, which I did think they would do. They beat them 45-20, beat Kent Denver 35-14 there. Denver West, Alameda were both wins. Denver West 6-3-20. Alameda was a forfeit, it looks like here. So, boom. Then I thought they would lose to TCA at the end of the season, but they ended up beating them 15-14 there, which ended up being big. They would go to the playoffs and host a home game to Montezuma Cortez, who had to make a really long drive, but surprisingly would lose to them 21-7 there, which was one of the bigger upsets here for Elizabeth. Regardless, though, they got to feel good about what they're bringing back here and their success from last season. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Talk about graduating seniors. First, they graduate their quarterback, Jason Weber here. He threw for 550 yards, 6 touchdowns to 6 picks, while rushing for 251 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. He was relatively efficient, but this is still a loss for them as he was a multi-year starter, I'm pretty sure. They also lose Riley Callaghan here. He had 41 tackles at outside linebacker. They lose Ronald Wagner at defensive lineman. He had 37 tackles, 5 tackles for loss. And Cody Wade. He was the co-leader in interceptions with 3, and he also had 26 tackles. Altogether, though, they're only losing 4 of their top 13 tacklers, which are all of those guys. And none of them are their leading tacklers. And they pretty much return everyone else, right? So they lose their quarterback, lose a couple of defensive players, but that's pretty much it. This is pretty much the same Elizabeth squad. And so let's talk about key players, starting with their star, Cooper Connolly here, the 6'3", 180-pound senior running back, ran for 647 yards, 4 touchdowns, while catching 8 receptions for 133 yards. He also had 67 tackles and 3 picks. I think he has a chance to be a potential MVP candidate in 2A this year as he leads one of the most experienced squads, just one of the best athletes here in the state. And so Cooper Connolly will be a tough guy to stop on both sides of the ball. They also returned their second leading running back here, second leading rusher, in Ethan Stone, the 6', 160-pound running back, rushed for 611 yards, 7 touchdowns here as the second leading rusher. It's also worth noting he had a huge 209-yard, 3-touchdown performance against Devlin, which is wild. So it shows that he could definitely get it done as well there. And then they also bring back Ryken Angel here. The incoming senior is a 6'3", 225-pound tackle, defensive tackle. Will be a big part of this line and, defense moving forward, especially in the run game. And he headlines a big-time defense that is extremely experienced here and has shown to play extremely well throughout, this season. Or last season. So there you go there. I mean, this is a talented squad and big things should be expected for them. Let's go ahead and talk about this 2023 season here. So to start, they go ahead and play Devlin. This should definitely be a dub. It's away, but Devlin's losing a lot, so I don't think it'll be that close. Same with Burlington. They're losing a lot, so that should be a dub. Following that, they play the Academy. They're losing a ton again, so that should be another dub there. Englewood, I think, should be a win. Kent Denver, I think, will be another win there. Could definitely be closer, but I think that's a win. Denver West should be a win. Alameda should be a win. And honestly, TCA, that game might be closer. It's at TCA in Colorado Springs, so I might go to that one. But I think that's a dub for Elizabeth here. They're returning a lot more, and that TCA squad from last year was pretty big on offense and defense. This year, they're losing pretty much all of that, right? And I don't know if they have big bodies to replace some of those guys. So I think that should be a dub. So altogether, I don't think they have all their games scheduled yet here. Only 8 so far here. But I have them going 8-0 with a window of wins between 7 to 10 here. I really believe they could go undefeated with the 8 games scheduled here. They will be a tough team to beat with a tough running style and a good defense. They may not be the most flashy team in 2A, but I think they could be good enough to make a deep run, similar to Brush from a couple years ago. I think this team's really good. If Cooper Connolly and Ethan Stone and everyone else could stay healthy, but especially those guys, I think Elizabeth will be in a great spot here. Those guys will, Cooper Connolly, I mean, he's just so tough to stop here, and I think he is a next level football player. Whether it's running back or linebacker, we'll just have to see, right? But yeah, that's Elizabeth. I think they're a contender. I think they are. Losing to Montezuma Cortez, obviously embarrassing. I don't know if they do that again, though. And if they do, then, well, that's on coaching, honestly. But I think they should be a really good team. So, boom, there you go there. All right, but that'll wrap up this episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast. Thank you so much for rocking with us. There's going to be a lot of content coming out between now and the start of the football season, so make sure you follow us on social media here at Playmakers Corner. Playmaker Corner on Twitter, though, but Playmakers Corner on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and our YouTube channel as well, where we are also posting content. I know for some people that is a little bit easier for them to listen to us on YouTube, so there you go there. We'll be posting a lot more season previews as I finish it up here, and we should be posting our watch list by now, so yeah, it should be a lot coming out here, so make sure you follow us there to check all of that out. But until next time, we will catch you later.